All right, good evening, everyone. So our second presentation this evening will be our school budget presentation. And this presentation follows what's been several months of building and department level presentation, sharing sort of an outlook as to what the 22-23 school year budget will look like. Before I begin, I do want to thank our business official, Jill Figarella. She'll be joining me up here in just a few minutes, and her team that really did all the hard work to put together what I think is a very fiscally responsible and academically rigorous budget. So just a quick reminder what our district goals were going into this year. Over the summer, we met with our Board of Education, our administrators, and developed what was our 3 goals for this school year: to reflect, learn, and thrive. And on the bottom is our sort of summary. Reflect on the struggles and identify small victories we experienced. Capitalize on the lessons learned and replicate to improve our practices. Acknowledge the past, but focus on thriving in the present. Now, I know we've certainly had some bumps in the road, and we had a different vision for what this would look like in August when we wrote it, not knowing Delta and Omicron were on its way. But I think really now, especially the last month or so, as we see an easing of COVID-related restrictions, that thrive word really begins to stand out. And you could see it in the faces of our staff and our students and our parents who are finally welcoming back into the building for the first time in several years. So this graphic is meant to represent some of the many challenges or priorities we need to balance while developing our school budget. And at the center, our goal is always to enhance our student programs and opportunities. So some of the things, the attributes we need to balance are student enrollment, any new programs that are coming in, staffing needs, our BOCES budget, unfunded mandates, hopefully there's no more coming. State aid, all right, state aid, we have a projection for state aid, but until New York State adopts its budget, which we hope will be on or before April 1st, state aid remains uncertain. Capital costs, the tax cap threshold, which we'll talk more about later. Employee and vendor contracts, benefits, and benefits is a big driving factor behind our budget this year, especially health insurance, and special education needs, which sometimes depends on student by student. We could have a new student move into the district, and the district could be forced to expend $100,000 for that one student's education or a placement in an outside program. So one of our real goals this year was to make sure that we were remaining as fiscally transparent as possible. So some of the ways in which we've hoped to accomplish that is by having each building and department present their own sort of their own level of budgetary requests. So we get that information out early. Ms. Figarella has hosted so far 4 budget Q&A sessions, and I'm actually pleased to see many of the faces who attended those budget Q&A sessions here this evening to learn more about our budget. We have new dates coming. I know we were talking today about some new opportunities now that the full budget will be released today or tomorrow, whenever that goes public, that individuals have more information, may derive new questions, so we want to make ourselves available to answer any of those questions that the community may have. Our goal is always to be fiscally accountable, transparent, and making sure that we're able to sustain our programs. We do believe there's a direct relationship between successful schools and property values, and we've been working really hard to fiscally plan to make sure that we're able to sustain what we have without needing to go out to the community to ask for additional funds. A quick overview of our enrollment. You'll notice that the graduating class this year, 156 students. Sorry. That's our last sort of large class leaving. But you'll also notice relative stability amongst the other classes coming in. I averaged next year all of our class sizes, and they average out to 118. We very well may have a kindergarten class of 118 next year, which would mirror our overall average K through 12. There is one outlier, one very small class in there, 79 students, but for the last 4 years, we were well above that in the hundreds. So while our overall enrollment has been decreasing for several years, we've certainly leveled off and reached a point of stability where K through 12 will have very stable class sizes, which certainly helps for staffing and other needs like that. One of the facts that we've shared earlier this year that I think is really important to mention, since the initial shutdown of COVID in the spring of 2020, Putnam Valley has seen 165 more students move into the district than we've had move out of the district. Now that is very different than the trend has been for many years before that. If we lost 90 students, we typically gained 90 students. If we lost 60 students, we typically gained 60 students. That number remained relatively flat. But I think based upon what we were able to do during the pandemic and the hard work of our teachers and staff members to keep our buildings open, to have 100% of our elementary school students back, the housing market in Putnam Valley, I don't think you could buy or rent a house anywhere, we've seen a tremendous growth in the number of families moving into Putnam Valley and moving into our schools. So I think that's just a sign of all the hard work that has been put into the school over the last couple of years. This slide highlights some of our programs, initiatives, and projects that are upcoming for next school year. You'll notice that some of these are actually anticipated to be funded by federal stimulus funds, but still I wanted to highlight them. So there's certainly a renowned focus on literacy. We're doing a lot of work around writing K through 8. We're doing DRA assessment training, sort of retraining our teachers, K through 6, guided reading training in the middle school, and our elementary school teachers are looking to begin piloting a new ELA program in grades K through 1 next year. We're looking to expand our elementary school Mandarin program to grade 3. So those incoming third graders have had a sort of a survey in Mandarin. It's a half hour a week. It's not a Mandarin class, just a teaching assistant that pushes in and works with the teacher to help the students just really become exposed to a new language. So that first cohort will be going into their fourth year of Mandarin, so we want to extend it. And that's a partnership with BOCES. We're exploring the implementation of the middle years program, so that's an IB program at the middle school. We're planning for a district-sponsored pre-kindergarten program. That's something that it's offset by state funds, so we hope there'll be no expense for the district to offer that. We're continuing our success with the diploma program at the high school. Really, we're seeing, coming out of the pandemic, we continually see a surge in the social emotional needs of our students and mental health needs, and that's something that we're looking to further invest in to support our students. We've also seen an increase in our E&L students. So again, there's state requirements based upon instructional minutes for those students. So we have to make sure our staffing is able to provide those mandatory minutes. We're looking to replace what has traditionally been a remote instruction option for students at the middle school and the high school for Mandarin. We're looking to hire our own teacher to move to an in-person instruction model. I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's the value of in-person instruction over remote instruction. So that's an experience we want to give our students the opportunity to learn Mandarin in the middle school and high school. It's just one of the languages they have to choose from, but to be able to learn in person. So we're looking to bring that teacher on, and that'll replace an expense that was otherwise through BOCES. We're looking to reduce class sizes, especially at the elementary school. One of the big priorities of the federal stimulus funds is to correct learning loss, and we think one of the ways that we can put our teachers in positions to be most successful with their students is to reduce class sizes. We have 2 large groups in incoming second and incoming third graders, so we're looking to bring in a couple extra teachers using the federal stimulus funds to reduce those class sizes. We're continuing to search for a library media specialist at the middle school. If anyone here knows a certified library media specialist, send them our way. We're looking to still continue to invest in our health and safety systems, filtration, HVAC, air exchange, other ways to ensure that our students are safe and staff are safe. Looking to create new outdoor learning spaces. We've seen a tremendous increase in the use of outdoor learning spaces over the last couple of years. We want to provide teachers with new innovative spaces to bring their students. We're offering summer support and enrichment programs for our students. Parent engagement evenings, finding opportunities to bring parents back into the buildings, to allow them to partner with us to support their children at home, bringing them in and teaching them reading strategies that they can then turnkey back to their families or their children at home. and we're looking to revamp our Innovation Academy 2.0, which was a very successful professional development program we had in place prior to the pandemic. We do anticipate some staffing changes, so some of these will duplicate what we saw on the last slide. We're looking to bring in 3 general education teachers at the elementary school, 2 of which will be funded with federal stimulus funds to reduce class sizes. Our estimated class sizes for next school year, kindergarten we have 20. Now there's asterisks there because students are still registering, so we're not exactly sure how many kindergarten students we have, but I think we're up to 111 so far, which is great. First grade 20, second grade 19, third grade 20, and fourth grade 19. Some of those classes were up to 25 or 26 students this year, so that's the difference in class sizes by bringing in a couple extra teachers. We're budgeted for a special education teacher in the middle school, so we're not entirely sure whether we'll need to fill this position yet. We want to make sure that it's budgeted for in case we do, and that's to support a self-contained class of students. I had mentioned before, we've already brought on an additional E&L teacher. We brought on an additional nurse. Our school nurses have been essential to us throughout the pandemic, and they were in desperate need of an extra set of hands, so we were able to bring in an extra certified nurse. Extra teaching assistants to help support our classroom teachers, and we had already spoken about the Mandarin. There's obviously related expenses associated with this. We've worked hard to increase our sub-pay. When a teacher's absent, we want to be able to entice substitutes to Putnam Valley to cover those classes. The same is true for our custodial staff, clerical staff. We want to bring in talented individuals to take the places of individuals who may be sick. We continue to use our custodial staff who are very talented to in-source projects and save work. We are seeing an 8% increase in our health insurance costs, and that's a real driving factor of our budget. We're still working to settle it's our PVFT teachers contract, which is up at the end of this school year, so that's a bit of an unknown, and we obviously have to continue to meet our other contractual obligations. Some of the exciting things that are coming up next year are some capital improvement projects. For those who are familiar, on the upper left-hand corner, that's the modular building behind the elementary school. It's been used as classroom spaces in the past, more recently used as storage. So we were at risk of losing this building. The roof was beginning to fail. The HVAC units needed to be replaced. So we made the decision to invest some money into this. Replace the roof, replace the HVAC, get some good air circulating through there, remediate any other mold or anything else that was inside that building to make it a usable space yet. So we have lots of potential uses for this space, but certainly was worth investing some money into it as opposed to losing that space as an acceptable space for occupancy. We have the second phase of our middle school bathroom renovations upcoming. So this is actually a picture of one of the finished bathrooms from last year. For anyone who was in there prior to this remodel, those bathrooms were original from 1972. Tiles were falling off the walls, tiles were up from the floors, there was mismatched components in there. So the new ones certainly look much more fitting for our students. High school roof is now 22 years old. So like any roof that's 22 years old, it's beginning to show some wear. In an effort to fund as much of the maintenance work in-house as possible, we've prioritized roof work and we're able to budget for it within our general fund. So in lieu of going out and asking the voters to approve a bond to support all of the roof work, we're looking to do it in stages and fund it with our own general fund capital improvement. So we hope that'll happen. I had mentioned the creation of new outdoor classroom spaces. So this is an example of what our current space looks like, but we're looking to build new innovative spaces. And we're also installing a new water filtration system here at the elementary school, carbon filtration. So that's something that we need to do to address materials or chemicals that were found within the water. As I had mentioned earlier, our goal is to really bring as much of this capital maintenance work inside our general education budget, and we want to hold off having to go out and ask the community for additional funds to support these capital improvements. So it's important that we budget for them in a way that minimizes our debt and it actually gives us more space in our allowable tax cap. So we're utilizing some of our reserves to pay for these projects, and Now, the example I gave for that is taking some of our reserves to pay for the high school roof. And we're also maximizing our opportunities for state aid. So we'll talk a little bit later about how some of these projects, although made possible because of the federal stimulus funds, are budgeted within our general fund budget. And the purpose of that is to maximize the state aid, which is 67% of that project money we get back from the state, as opposed to zero we would get back if we funded it through the federal stimulus funds. So that is my section, and I would like to welcome up our business official, Ms. Jill Figarella. Thanks.
I'm going to put this back. To juggle. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Here I'm going to talk about the numbers. Dr. Luft gave us an overview of some of the anticipated changes and the staff changes and programs, and I'm going to talk about the money. So the money we need to build our budget comes through revenues, and the district has to always figure a way that there's a gap between local dollars and state dollars. So this year we have the benefit of the governor enacting foundation aid to be put back into our state aid. So we're going to see an increase of about 3% in state aid this year. In 2006, the governor created a campaign for fiscal equity, but it was never fully funded, and it was called foundation aid. And now school districts, then at that time, school districts, because it wasn't funded, were shorted across the state like $4 billion. We're not going to be able to recover the money that they haven't given us to this point, but going forward, they plan on fully phasing it back in by 2024. So again, we're going to see a 3% increase in state aid, some of it foundation aid. About 2% of our revenues come from miscellaneous revenues, earnings on investments, refunds from prior years, from vendors and whatnot, and the use of our debt reserve is also included in that number. And the debt reserve is that we're using towards the construction for the roof at the high school is in that number, and we're using $1 million of our debt reserve for the first phase of the roof replacement. The roof replacement itself the whole thing would be about $3.5 million. So we certainly can't do that all at once. And again, when it needs to be replaced, it would be done in phases, which makes sense not to do it all at once either. 2.7% of our revenues are going to be from transfers in from restricted and unrestricted general fund reserves, because we need that amount to close the gap between the aid, the miscellaneous earnings, and the school taxes. And of course, school taxes make up the bulk of our revenues, but by using the fund balance and the reserves, we minimize those amount of school taxes that we have to raise to close that gap. So our revenues, let me put some numbers to those percentages. Okay, so we got our state and federal aid sources as about 24.8% of our revenues at $13.8 million. The local revenue sources that I mentioned and the debt service reserve of the $1 million to fund the roof is $1.5 million. Our appropriated fund balance and operating fund reserves are $1.1 million. And that's $800,000 from our unrestricted reserves. So those are they're not restricted for any use. So we're going to bring those in and use them. And $300,000 from our retirement reserve. And we can remove that from our retirement reserve because we have 8 staff members retiring this year. And the last item there is our tax levy. It's a 1.49% change from last year, a very low change in the tax rate, and tax levy at $39.3 million. The total budget being $55.8. So here are the appropriations, or where that money's being spent. We have our general support area of the budget, which funds our administration, our business district office, operations and maintenance, and and our district insurance policies. And that is going actually down very slightly, 0.02%. For $4.9 million. And our instructional part of the budget, which is the largest part of the budget, is for salaries for teaching and student programs, moving up slightly at 0.15%. Just transportation kind of speaks for itself. It's our contractors, our salaries for transportation, the upkeep of the transportation department with supplies and materials, 4%, and the benefits and debt service are going up 15.9%, as we mentioned. Money going in through some capital and remodeling expenses. I'll get into that more as I explained about that between the federal stimulus and the capital changes. And then our debt payments are included in there, which are for bonded construction projects that have been going on from the past through now. And our total overall budget, again, $55.8 million. So this is just another way of looking at where the money goes in the budget. We have 43.7% going towards classroom instruction, 22.2% going into employee benefits, 9.1% for debt service and capital transfers, 6% towards transportation, 5.1% towards support services. Support services are like our health services, our occupational therapists, speech therapists, those types of services that support students. 4.8% goes towards operations and maintenance. And again, 4% towards general administrative support, 2.6% towards media and technology support, and 2.4% towards co-curricular and athletics. The state also wants us to present the budget as a three-part component budget, indicating how much percent goes towards each one of those things: instruction, administration, and capital. You can see there, that is how the pie is broken up. So I want to talk a little bit about property tax cap calculation, and those of you who may not be familiar with it, it's something that we have to do every year. It's a formula. It's an 8-step formula. It determines the amount of property taxes that a school district collects from its owners, property owners, to balance its budget. And that's only after we account for state aid and other revenue. The formula itself determines what threshold voter support that we're going to need to pass the budget, whether we need a supermajority or not. And that means, although it's called a 2% tax cap, it doesn't cap taxes at 2%. And we are lucky enough to be able to say that our tax levy increase is 1.49%. We're allowed to go up to 1.62% according to the formula. However, we will only need to go to 1.49 because of the other revenue sources that we've brought into the budget. This is the difference between those two numbers is about $43,000, which we will not have to add to the tax levy. So again, this is due to the foundation aid, the influx of the foundation aid, and the availability of the federal stimulus funds. And just a note there at the bottom that we do not know what the final tax roll assessments are going to be and what the final equalization rate is going to be until July. But when we find out what those are, it will determine what the final tax rate is. So for right now, I'm going to go over what the rates have been. The last couple of years, we had September of 2020, our final tax rate was $25.68 per $1,000 of your assessment, of your home's assessment. In September of 2021, it was $24.72 per $1,000 of your home's assessment, so lower than the year before. And this year, looking at the average home's value, and we could only establish what that average home value was in 2021. We got that information from the county. About $353,000 is the average home value in 2021. And our estimated rate for the upcoming year based on that tax levy of 1.49% increase is $25.11 per $1,000 of assessment, which can change again in July, slightly up or down a few cents, depending on the assessed values and the equalization rate. And on average, that's about $138 per average home in Putnam Valley. The tax cap, the district has remained tax cap compliant for 10 years in a row, and has presented a fiscally responsible budget because it has stayed below that tax cap. Here's a 10-year history of our final school tax rates. So you can see coming in at a rate of 25.11 is actually less than it was when we first started out with the tax cap back in 2013-14. So here are some of the impacts, what are impacting appropriations in the budget, the upcoming budget. These are the significant impacts that you'll see. We have staff retirement savings. We have 2 teaching and 8 non-teaching positions. So I was incorrect earlier when I said we had 8 people retiring. We have 10 people retiring, 8 non-teaching and 2 teaching. That yields us about savings, because those teachers will be replaced, that staff will be replaced and those teachers will be replaced. So the savings there would be $235,000. Adding the 1 gen ed teacher at the elementary school, because the other 2 are funded through the federal stimulus, is about $75,000. The additional special education middle school teacher, if needed, $75,000. Those are first level teachers. Pre-K program is state funded, so that $173,000 you see there is fully funded by state aid. That's not, so we have to lay out the money, so it increases the budget, but actually comes back in through revenue. So I have to show that that's part of the impact to the bottom line. Contractual costs, this would be based on the bargaining unit contracts. Those will yield an increase of about $450,000. We have 2 pension plans, the teaching and the non-teaching pension plan, both through the state. One of them, the rates have increased, and we're going to see a $422,000 increase. The other pension plan has luckily decreased, so we're going to see a $467,000 decrease. And then our health insurance premiums have quite a large impact on our budget. They're going to, I believe, I'm going to make a prediction that I don't think is anything that anyone's not expecting. It would be over the next couple of years we're going to see those increases. And this year it's pretty steep. It's 8%. It's $416,000 in our budget. I think the effects of, the COVID health care that's had to, be provided for people, and we haven't even seen the full effect of that yet. So I predict that next year we're going to see quite an increase as well. Then we have some out-of-district tuitions that are increasing our budget, about $250,000. And other contractual changes, there's vendors, technology, there's inflation, and that's $100,000. Hopefully we won't see as much inflation as they're saying. Inflation has gone up. We can't go up as much as inflation. We're capped at 2%. Again, our tax levy is only going up 1.49. The capital purchase of our administration building. So our lease is up at the administration building. It's been 5 years. We've been over at the other location, and now it's time to buy the building. So we have to purchase the building to stay there. To lease it continually would raise the rent quite a bit, so it's time to buy the building. And that's gonna put in the budget, it's in the general operating budget, it's $368,000. The roof work for the first phase at the high school I mentioned is $1 million. We're taking that money from reserves to pay for these 2 items. And the overall budget to budget change is $2.6 million. So balancing the budget, we have to figure out where the revenues are coming to pay for that, right? So I tried to paint a picture here so you could see. Our increase in state aid is $2.2 million. Our tax levy change of 1.49% is $578,000. And then our district reserves are making up the difference. This year, we're using 2.1. Last year, we used 2.3. And overall, that's what's making up the impact to the budget, $2.6 million that you just saw on the previous page. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the pandemic-related federal aid stimulus. So this money is not funneled through the general operating budget. This money is accounted for in the federal aid fund. It's a separate fund from the the general fund operating budget that you vote on. So the district became eligible to receive 2 federal stimulus grants like all schools across New York. It's based on Title I entitlement, so that's how they figure out how much our piece of the pie is. We have 2 grants. The first one for $1.3 million. We applied for it, we received approval. We don't get any money till we spend it. We've talked about it a number of times at different meetings, and until we spend the money, like I said, we don't get the money back. And we have until September of 2023 to spend it. The second grant was for $1,019,000, and that was recently approved. It hadn't been approved until the last few weeks. The funds have become available, again, just like the first one. We don't get any of the money back until we spend it. We've applied for it, we've received approval, and the funds are available until September of 2024, so just a year beyond the other one. So there were federal guidelines issued for these funds, okay? They cannot be part of the general operating budget, I mentioned that. They're part of a separate fund. They are a one-time federal revenue stream. The guidance for them, although they allow, there's a lot of leeway with the guidance, right? So they allow for many things that you want to spend the money on as long as it relates to learning loss, health improvement in the buildings, re-engaging students, student mental health, remodeling projects, cleaning supplies, anything that is COVID related, but the recommendation for the use of the funds comes with not any caveats to do certain things to get other things, but more or less how do you spend it wisely. So capital expenses, if you budget for them in the general operating budget, you can receive building aid on them. If you don't budget for them in the general operating budget, you don't get that building aid. So although you would get back 100% of the money you spent through the federal stimulus, it doesn't pay to handle it that way. What pays is to put it into the general operating budget, get your 67% building aid, and exchange that for anything that's not aidable in your budget, and put that into the federal stimulus. Once you've spent the money for the projects and the federal stimulus money goes away, you switch those unaidable expenditures back into the general fund budget. So that kind of is what is explained here. I'm going to leave this all up here so people can see it when they look it up on the website if they want to read into the document and see what that's all about. So again, applications were filed for preliminary review by New York State Education Department, and it was based on anticipation of reparation of learning loss. Surveys were sent to the community when federal stimulus funds became available. Final approvals are still pending, right? Because although we applied and we were approved, we still haven't gotten any of the money. So once we file for the reimbursement of the money, then we can say that they've been approved and we've gotten the funds. The spending period again is 9/30/2023 and 9/30/2024 for those 2 grants. Okay, so these are the funds that were switched between, or exchanged between the two so that we could maximize the aid. We have classroom salaries that we could classify into the federal stimulus funds of $575,000. We have the floating nurse, $50,000, and teaching assistants, 3 teaching assistants at $75,000. So that all equals $700,000. And then these particular projects, which we're going to get 67% aid in over the 15 years, which we don't want to lose out on by putting in the federal stimulus funds and putting them in the general fund instead, are the outdoor learning spaces, the storage loft at the transportation garage. The building that's being remodeled behind the elementary school has been the storage area for financial records, classroom records, things like that. Those are going to need to be moved into there's a loft in the transportation garage that's being remodeled to support those files. The classroom furniture, modular classroom renovation, that's the building I just talked about. The water filtration system at the elementary school, and the bathroom renovation at the middle school. So those are where we exchange the funds between the two, the grants and the general operating budget. Okay. That's all the financial information that I have to give tonight. I want to know, if you want to know where the vote is, it's going to be held at the elementary school as usual. It's on May 17th between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. And there's absentee ballot information there. You can contact myself for any questions about the budget, or Maureen Bellino, the district clerk. We are going to talk a little bit about contingency budget in a second, but I don't know if anybody has any questions on what we just talked about. Maybe you want to talk about that first.
Sure.
Okay.
A lot of it's detailed. Mostly a question on the pre-K being funded through the state. Is that being reimbursed within the same year or following year?
Okay, so the state aid for that comes in the same year.
So we're telling them we're going to do this. They calculate that into the.
We have to
current year.
apply for it. They'll approve it. We've already been told how much it is.
Okay.
So that's what our maximum amount is that we can spend on that.
Does anybody else want to go? Should I just go?
No, go ahead. I have a quick kindergarten to follow up on that
Okay.
one. So I was going to ask if it's not funded, are we still doing it? But you said has been approved?
It's been, well,
Or
we
is it- we've
didn't do the
submitted?
application yet.
Okay.
The budget hasn't passed yet, so if the budget passes, hopefully, we will be able to utilize that money, but maybe Dr. Luft has something.
I would say the state identifies what our allocation could be up to when they do our state aid runs. So once we file our application, we know what the maximum amount New York State will refund us for. So we just have to write our RFP in a way to offer it so we know that we don't exceed what we're going to get back from the state. Right? So it'll be a couple, a class or two. We can't do 5 classes. We can't do universal pre-K for every student in Putnam Valley. We can do a class or 2 because that's how much we think we can offer while staying under what's offered by the state.
Thank you.
Secondly, on the health insurance increases, which I think, we are in a kind of the beginning stages of a pretty steep spike, which we've seen graphs like this before for similar reasons. Does that include active and retired staff?
It does. It does. It includes both.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So the appropriation slide, you had benefit and debt increase at 15.9%. Does that 8% fall into that
Yes, it
category?
does.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll leave this to after. And just so I'm clear, on the capital expenses for the admin building and the high school roof, we're putting it through operations, which means we're not doing any financing. It is a one-year expense.
Right. We're not financing either one. That money is being pulled from reserves in order to pay for them.
That was mine too.
Okay.
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 Those are very in sync.
Okay.
And I think I've said this before, just for clarity's sake, the federal stimulus that is going to be used for the $750,000 is going to be used for classroom salaries and floating nurse and teacher assistants. We are going into this with eyes wide open that that money goes away, which means unless we find a way to make it work within ongoing budgets, those positions also go away, correct?
Correct.
I mean, as soon as the capital expenditures are completed that first year, those come off with the general fund, those other things go back. But some of those positions are still earmarked with federal stimulus funds, and those are the positions we would have to, right now the intention is to eliminate those positions when the federal stimulus funds are expended. We would have to have a conversation before we added anything back into the general fund budget.
Because
So it's tricky. It's the first year you sort of, there's this massive swap
right.
of capital projects for salaries, but it's a one-year swap in order to get the state aid. Next year, those salaries go back in to the budget minus whatever was supported through the federal stimulus funds.
Yeah, the timing on it isn't ideal. They end it in September of 2024, which is like the beginning of another school year. So it's not ideal the way that they have the dates, the funding dates. So it would have to be a decision. And then we also talked about the fact that there could be retirements between now and then, and needs change. So we don't know what those are. So.
Right, but the goal, or so the reason why the federal government is giving us this stimulus is that we're addressing learning loss, and we're putting these positions in place specifically to address that. So we should, if all things being considered equal, getting over the hump type situation.
Right, aside from enrollment increase or something like that, correct.
You took my question, Mr. Fry.
Sorry, I asked if anybody else wanted to go. I have other things, but they can go after.
Yeah, I just want to say a few words about contingency. So, contingent budget, which is not something I like to talk about, because it means that it's a conversation about a budget that fails, right? So when voters reject a school budget, the board has to make a decision. And they either have to decide they're going to submit the same budget for a second vote, they're going to submit a revised budget, or they're going to adopt a contingency budget. If the budget's rejected a second time, the board has to adopt a contingency budget. And what that means is that the tax levy would have to revert to the prior year's amount, and Putnam Valley would have to cut what would be the increase in the tax levy, right? So $578,000 from the adopted budget. Just as an example, and theoretically speaking, 4 or 5 staff positions and benefits, this is what it could mean, right? 4 or 5 staff positions and benefits, materials and supplies of $70,000, extracurricular activities, about $160,000. I mean, these are just examples. It could come from any area of the budget, but it would definitely affect staffing and program. When it affects staffing, it affects program. So the education law dictates certain types of restrictions as well. Community use of buildings and grounds is no longer available without a cost. Any equipment over $5,000 would be prohibited from being purchased. That's capital projects would be eliminated unless they're related to an immediate health and safety need. So reverting to a prior year's tax levy would have a compounding effect also. The budget would start with a $1.2 million deficit the following year because you would be eliminating the increase in the upcoming year, and you would be starting your tax cap formula with a number that was that much lower the following year. So you're already experiencing a $1.2 million deficit if you were to have to revert back. So now you're talking about doubling all of those things that I just mentioned, which definitely means a decrease or a diminishing program for all students. And in reality, the savings for the average home, if they were to, if the budget were to be defeated and the tax levy had to be reverted, is 38 cents a day for a full year's increase on an average home. I just wanted to make that point. I could talk more about it. If you have any questions, I can answer them.
I have a contingency question.
Sure.
Because the way we present the budget and where the dollars are allocated based on expectation of using federal stimulus funds, are those things that we are earmarking for federal stimulus funds, how are they impacted by a failed budget and a contingency budget adoption?
So unless those changes in, you're talking about the capital expenses?
I'm talking about both the capital and in the staff piece.
So it all depends on how we want to handle contingency if it happens, right? Because if we decide we're going to, eliminate positions, or if we're going to, how are we going to handle that decrease in the budget? Some of those capital projects probably could not happen, and therefore we would end up having it. But we can't switch those other things back in, because now we're just putting money back in the budget again, right? So if you take the capital out, it doesn't really help, because we can't put those positions back in.
So then we would have to, within that budget amount, that the contingent budget, the minus 578, whatever this year's budget is essentially, we would have to look to federal stimulus funds to fund other things within the budget.
That would eventually have to go away and never come back, maybe. I mean, it all depends on what happens the following year, right? So
you have here the 4 to 5 staffing positions for the contingency budget. 3 of those federal stimulus funds could be utilized. If we had to lose 4 to 5 teachers, we could utilize 3 from the federal stimulus funds for those positions.
right, but then how would you ever?
behind
The problem is
the next
trying to
year.
bring it back,
Right.
and overall, the entire process of a failed budget is just, it means that something's going to give, right? So you got to give away something, you don't get it back.
So, right, if we were to use the stimulus funds, Jeanette, for those additional staff, so year 2 or year 3, whichever it is, then we're already starting with that deficit of, and then then you can never afford to get them back.
And the compounded deficit on top of it, because you're not going to get that tax levy back that you started with the year before, because that's what starts your formula for your tax cap every year. You have to use that formula. So we're talking about possibly going out for a supermajority, which after, if a budget were to fail, I don't know what the chances of would
Right.
be to pass a budget like that. But these are just I have to give this information out.
Sure.
I don't expect any of this to happen, hopefully. And with the 1.49% increase to the tax levy, we're just, we're making things happen with a very low tax rate increase.
So we, for the most part, would save as much as we would be paying if the budget passed.
I'm sorry, say that
We would be
again?
saving, you have here, savings to average home, $138 for a year. That's how much, if the budget, if and when hopefully the budget passes, we'd be paying approximately $138
Right.
a year for the average home.
Which equates to what I said,
Right.
38 cents a day.
Right.
So I don't, I have to give the facts and what can happen, so that's what I'm here to do.
Well, I think, just in general, if we're to believe that we're in the world of 7+% an annual inflation rate, given what our healthcare costs increase are, the ability to remain within the cap, remain below the cap with 1.49% tax levy change, it seems to me it's a solid educational program that also looks very much towards maintaining taxpayer concerns.
Jill, I'm sorry, just one more time, and I know the answer, but it's worth repeating as many times as possible, that we cannot use the federal stimulus funds to pay down the budget.
Correct. No, not at all.
So I have just one quick question, going back to slide 12, if you want to look at it. But I'm sorry, it's not about the contingency budget. It has appropriations. It's not here, and I just can't do math. It's blue. It's right before it's right before the dollar bill thing. I can't do the math that quickly, but the transportation cost seemed like a big % jump, but is it about the same from the previous year? And I do know that our contract is very low compared to other vendors, but is that about the same increase we've played with transportation? Or dealt with, sorry.
It's not just the contractor, it also includes salary
Fuel?
changes for our employees as well, because don't forget, we have a hybrid system, we use our own contractor, we use the contractor and our own drivers at the same time.
Right.
The fuel has
Fuel costs, sure. Right.
really gone up.
Right. Okay.
I don't know how. Yeah, there is a year 2 phase in of the contract. So the first year, if you remember, we moved half of the bus fleet to a 6-hour day, and the second half is now moving to a 6-hour day as well. So that's something that we have with the contractor in negotiations when we negotiated that contract, which is still lower per day than 5 or 6 districts surrounding us. Just want to say that.
And I forgot that the fuel costs are in there, so.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
So we have one last slide. So one of the things that came up during our community meetings was community members looking for quick and easy facts. One of our commitments is to make sure that we get accurate information out to the community so the community can make an informed decision on May 17th when they come to vote on the school budget. So this is our first attempt at coming up with 5 fast budget facts, and we hope this is something that we could put out to the community in a variety of ways and provide individuals with accurate talking points about our school budget. So the first one speaks to what is really a priority of mine, is voter turnout. I think a community, thousands of community members coming out and voting on a school budget makes a profound statement, either positive or negative, regarding how we're doing as a school district. But when 9% of all eligible voters come out and vote, it's a little scary to me that 9% of all eligible voters are making such a drastic decision that impacts our entire community and all the students who live in it. So I would love to see a greater turnout of voters. Just some of those other facts. Our estimation is that 15% of parents of school-age children voted last year. So that means 85% of parents who have students that attend schools did not vote on our school budget last year. And just the perspective based upon last year, of all votes cast in the last budget, about 34% of those represented parents of school-age children. So it's one of the driving factors behind the budget presentation meetings. We're willing to do a roadshow and go and share this information. Actually, we're working closely with the PTA to get this information out, and I know they have a meeting coming up on March 30th. We'll be there to answer any questions or present any facts about the budget. I think the more people who know this is coming, the more people have information about it, the more informed decision they can make, the better that is for our students in Putnam Valley. Our second fact is the fact that we remain under the tax levy cap. We have been underneath it every year since its inception. So that speaks to our ability to do our best to control the local tax burden. As Jill had mentioned before, despite the fact that inflation is almost 7%, that 7% certainly has an impact on the contracts we have with individuals, the increasing fuel costs, and all the other factors that are driving up individuals' budgets. We're capped at 2%, and as Jill had mentioned, our actual full calculation comes out to 1.62%. So despite those increases, we were able to produce a budget that asked for a 1.49% increase. As previously mentioned in the presentation, This year's tax levy is below what the tax levy cap was 9 years ago. So again, that speaks volumes to the fiscal conservancy we put into our budgeting. And the last piece is that our budget sustains our programs, extracurricular activities, emotional wellness. It prioritizes our capital expenditures in a way that we're not asking taxpayers for more money. And that's it. Thank you.
So just want to mention one more thing. Dr. Luft mentioned more sessions for budget review. We didn't have any more scheduled on the calendar, but now that the line-by-line budget is out, and anybody who didn't get one, they're in the back there, and they're also available on our website. The best place to look at that line-by-line budget is on the website because the print is very small. So I want to say when you pull it up on the website, you can expand it and see much easier what you're looking at. On April 7th, we hope to have a budget review Q&A from 5:45 to 6:45. We'll also post that up so you can see that information. And again, if you have any questions, you want to talk about the budget, you don't want to talk about them here, you want to talk about them with me separately, or Dr. Luft, we're always available for questions. That's our email addresses. And this presentation is also on the website. I can be reached at that phone number every day, and I also will call you back if I'm not available when you do call. So if you have anything else you want to talk about, or anybody has any questions, we'll take them.
We scheduled time for a town board meeting presentation.
We do not have a time on the schedule right now to do that, but we can inquire about that if that's what you
I think it's a good idea for people who religiously watch those meetings and not ours.
Okay. And the budget notice...
Even though ours are a lot more fun.
The budget notice will be in the mail May 4th with hopes that it arrives where it's supposed to before the budget vote. We've had some luck in the past year, so hopefully that'll happen. And again, we always want to create the greatest probability for student success, and that's what we hope our budget is doing. So,
And an additional question on absentee ballots. The time has been extended to this election as well, where you can use, I think it was fear of getting COVID as a reason to get an absentee ballot, correct? It used to be a lot more restrictive. They've extended that for this year again. In
terms of medical reasons.
You can use that as a medical reason for getting an absentee ballot. So if you're afraid of lots of people in a room, even though we'll be safe, make sure that you go out and get an absentee ballot rather than not voting.
I just want to, we will, when we adopt the budget, I want to thank you as always, Jill, for your hard work and all of your staff's hard work. And I love, Jeremy, that your first fact is about every vote counts, but we want informed voters. So I will invite on their behalf, anybody contact Jeremy or Jill if you have any questions. We do want to hear your questions. And we do want to answer them any way we can in as transparent a way as we can. So, but Jill, now that I just told everybody to call you, thank you very much for all your hard work.
And you stole my thunder again. So I agree, Jill. Thank you very much for all the time and effort, and the business office as well for all the effort they put in.
Thank you. I should be thanking all of my staff. Everyone is wonderful. And we'll be back to do this again on April 7th.
Yeah.
So.
I also want to thank everyone that's attended these meetings that you've held, because as you said, the best thing to do is be educated. And I encourage you, if you haven't had the opportunity, to attend the April 7th meeting if possible.
Hey Jill, what's the I haven't followed in the last week the timeline with the Assembly and the Senate with their version of the budget. Do you know where they're at?
I mean, no. April 1st is supposed to be the deadline for finding out what the final state aid figures are. We never know if they're going to meet that deadline, so we're at their mercy right now. I'm hoping that it comes through. No, I haven't heard any whisperings about it not coming through. So,
Good, thank you.
They seem to at least be on schedule, from what I've heard.